Okay, so this is week 4, chapter 3. This chapter is based on socialization. I find that overall students have a fairly easy time relating to the information in this chapter because it's about something that everybody has experience with. And as we go through the chapter, you'll probably find yourself thinking about how you were raised, the influence of your parents or siblings or grandparents or aunts and uncles or cousins. You might think about your experiences in school and how that affected you and how you felt about yourself, your peer group, the media. The chapter has a lot of information in it, and whether I discuss every single thing in this chapter in the lecture or discuss everything with the same amount of detail, you are still responsible for all of it for the quiz for this week as well as for the final exam. The chapter focused on socialization begins by discussing several cases of socialization that are negative and frankly unpleasant to read about. Children who are unsocialized or poorly socialized for a long period of time, who then try to readjust to society among people. And it brings up, to begin with, a very, very well-known case of a boy who was named Victor. And it's thought that he was born around 1788, although it was never absolutely determined when he was born. But when he was discovered in 1800, he hadn't yet begun to go through puberty, so that gave the villagers a little bit of an idea. And it was never determined how this child came to be living in the woods around this small town in France. There had been reports of people seeing some kid in the woods. 6 years before 1800, he was spotted. And 3 years before 1800, he was actually caught by some hunters, who then brought him to a town, to the house of a widow, so she could care for him. But he managed to escape very quickly, and again would then be periodically seen in the woods by hunters and village people. He could not speak. His body was covered in scars. He seemed to be completely unaffected by temperature. So it could be snowing outside, and he would be outside completely naked and not be affected at all. All of this gave the impression to the villagers that he had been in the wild for an extended period of time, if not most of his life, because he seemed to be completely adjusted to being in the wild and living this way. His behavior was also very animalistic in nature. He would eat things not considered suitable for human consumption, make grunting noises because he couldn't speak. He would urinate and defecate where he stood. He often would not walk completely upright. He seemed to have no interest in being with other people, and he also didn't show any emotion. Now, eventually, Victor did learn a few phrases and was able to learn some of the social conventions expected of him, some social norms of behavior. But he never really did become a fully functional member of society. And after the excitement over his discovery faded, he had been living at a local deaf school. After he was no longer of interest for study, he moved in with the housekeeper of that school, and that's where he lived until he died. It's estimated that he was about age 40 when he died of pneumonia. So we simply don't know exactly where he came from, who his parents were, or how he ended up living in the woods around this village. Just like it was never exactly determined how old Jeannie was when her father decided that in order to protect her, she needed to be placed in isolation in a back room in their house. And there are, unfortunately, more examples of children living in isolation for various periods of time. If you search feral child online, Feral, you'll have a lot of them pop up. Although that term feral is not really completely accurate because that means completely wild. As the textbook states, the vast majority of these cases, the children never completely, 100% overcome their period of isolation. They never become fully integrated back into society. Why? We don't really know exactly why. There's no exact definitive answer to that question. Whether it's a lack of proper care in general, a lack of emotional stimulation, a lack of simple human communication, a lack of social interaction that hinders their social progress, and delays their mental development? Maybe a combination of all these factors? Maybe it's that parts of the brain actually physically do not develop in a very real sense, a lack of connecting neurons due to neglect. We don't know for sure, but what we do know is that the ability to learn culture and to become fully human is only a potential. It's not a guarantee when a baby is born, it's a potential. And for this potential to be actualized, socialization is needed. When people learn their culture by entering into and then disengaging from a series of roles. This might sound kind of complicated in an academic way, but it isn't really. And I think it's just stating what you already know. But before I go any further, I just want to be a little bit more specific and indicate that a role is simply a set of behaviors expected of a person occupying a particular position in society. So altogether then, when we talk about what socialization is, it means that from the time an infant is born, they are exposed to culture. They have culture transmitted to them. They have culture communicated to them. They are socialized from birth. The Spitz study cited in the book about the two groups of children, one raised in an understaffed orphanage and the other raised in a nursing home with a lot of social interaction, demonstrates in frankly a very disturbing manner. So the study conducted in the 40s was the first to demonstrate more systematically that social interaction with others is essential for children's development. You had one group of infants that were raised in an orphanage where the babies were more or less cut off from human contact in their cribs. You had not much of a staff in the orphanage, not enough people working there. The second group of babies were raised in a nursery in a prison where their mothers were incarcerated. And in that group, the mothers were allowed to give their babies care and affection every single day. And the babies were able to see one another and interact with one another and with the prison staff throughout the day. So I hope reading about this study, you immediately thought back to Chapter 1, where we looked at ethical and moral concerns in research. In the 1960s, Harry Harlow developed an experimental model that took Spitz's studies even further. And what he did was he took monkeys just a few hours after birth and isolated them. Some were isolated for 3 months, 6 months, or even 12 months, complete isolation from any other monkeys at all, including their mothers. And at the end of this isolation period, however long it was, he would put them back in with regular monkeys, like with other monkeys, and see what happened. So in the picture, you see this little monkey kind of clinging to this metal frame with a towel on it. When they would be in isolation, this would be the only thing placed in their cage for comfort. That's it. When they were introduced to other monkeys for the first time, physically they were fine, but their social behavior was very, very disturbing. They would sometimes huddle in the corners of their cages and rock back and forth obsessively. They made absolutely no attempt to interact with other monkeys or play. And when they matured into adults, they showed absolutely no interest in sexual activity and having a sex drive. But when other monkeys were isolated for periods of time later in life, it had practically no effect on their behavior. And I want you to think about this. Why is it significant that when the same kind of experiment was done with monkeys who were not newborns, but who instead were older, the results were not as negative? Because this demonstrated that there is a critical period for social development, and that is as a child. So the whole point of looking at these examples is to highlight just how absolutely crucial a minimal amount of socialization is during the childhood years. And if you don't have that socialization, this potential to be human seems to be lost. This has been studied extensively. In fact, I don't think there's a word to adequately describe just how much the process of socialization has been studied, how a person develops a sense of self, what affects it, how much each factor affects it, for how long, how one's sense of self changes and evolves, and how all these experiences have an effect on it.